Hey you guys, welcome to Honors Geometry Chapter 4. The way I want to handle this, this video is for you to do along with me. So I'm probably not going to do any single problem with you in its entirety because you don't need that. But what I'm going to do is I am going to kind of just from 1 to I think 22 or 20 or however many problems there are, I'm going to go through this giving you tips to do each problem, and hopefully that's enough to kind of help you out along the way. So let's start with problem 1. Classify by both the sides and angles, right? So those are the two words there, right? So first of all, the sides, right? So now if sides, we're talking scalene, isosceles, equilateral, right? What do you know about the sides? Well, you can kind of figure it out based on the angles, I imagine. And then what do you know about the angles? Now, to figure out the angles, you might have to set up an equation. But luckily, you know that all three of those angles have to add up to one particular number, and you all know what it is. Now, number 2 over here, right? Now, again, classify by both sides and angles. Okay, well, one of them should just be a slam dunk, right? And then before I kind of say any more, because we're not going to say much about this problem, but what do you need to solve and what don't you need to solve, right? Just because there's some variables there, just because it looks like you can set up an equation does not mean that you need an equation to answer this question. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the next one. Okay, RST is isosceles. Is it also equilateral? So the big question here, is this equilateral? Is this triangle equilateral? Now, I'll kind of give you a little tip to start off. Something we probably should have mentioned in the packet. We're going to say that RS and RT are congruent. We'll say that. We'll give you that, right? And then the question on the table, is this triangle also equilateral? Okay, set up some equations. You guys can take it from here. Number 4. Okay, so this is another angle puzzle. You guys saw this on the last packet. We chapter 3 packet, we had angle puzzles, right? What do you need to know in order to solve every single one of these mysterious angles? Well, you know everything you need to know, right? You know a triangle, right, has to add up to 180, right? You know that a linear pair of angles has to add up to 180, right? I'll even draw this stuff for you. Triangle adds to 180. Linear pair adds to 180 again, right? And then, of course, if you have that box, you know that that's a right angle. You know that that's 90 degrees. Okay, I've told you everything you need to know. You guys can definitely take it from here. All right, number 5. Again, kind of like a puzzle. The only thing you need to know is that triangles, all the angles add up to 180. You know that, you could solve this. I mean, I guess you also probably want to know the linear pair rule, but basically everything you need to know for number 4, you could figure out with number 5. Something that may be helpful to some of you guys, if you want to draw the triangle separately, that may help you. Right, that may help you. That may be just the push in the right direction some of you guys need. Okay, anyway. Take that for what it is. If it's helpful, that makes me happy. All right, number 6, slightly more complicated, right? But I see 2 variables. I imagine I'll be using a system of equations, right? But remember, system of equations mean you need 2 equations, right? Well, I guess if you're watching this video, you probably would like a little help with what those equations are. Also, just want to apologize. We got some announcements. We got the plumbing department is under construction right next door, so there may be some noises here that you may not be happy about. But anyway, hey, what do you know about these 2 angles here? What do you know about the blue angles? Right? Sounds to me like we got an equation if you know how these 2 angles have to relate to each other. The other question I have, what do you know about how the green angles relate to this red angle? All right, sounds like we got another equation there too, right? Hey, if you can't take it from here, I've already said too much, right? I'll say some more. Remote interior angles, right? Linear pair of angles. All right, now I really have said too much. The rest is up to you. Create a system of equations, solve that system of equations. All right, number 7. Find the measures of the sides of ABC with these vertices and classify ABC by its sides. Okay, that word right there, right? Because they're saying sides, right? They're kind of letting us off the hook. They're not telling us anything. They're not saying we got to say anything about the angles. We only got to say about something about the sides, and specifically the length of the sides. Right? What do you know that can help you find the lengths of the sides? You've got something right here, ladies and gentlemen. You got that distance formula. That distance formula that you guys know and love, that is your ticket to finding the lengths of the sides. All right, again, you guys are honor students. I probably already said too much. Let's move on to number 8. Okay. All right, here we go. This is something I probably should have said at the onset of this video, right? With all these problems, I want you to think geometry first, algebra second. I'm going to say that again. Think geometry first, algebra second. Right? That is the key to solving a lot of these challenging problems here. Right? So the reason I'm saying that, another thing I want you to remember is that numbers are better than letters. I always say this. Right? If FED is equiangular, they just told you a very, very, very useful piece of information about each of these angles. I feel like I'm giving you too many hints, but you know what? If you're watching through this video, you probably appreciate the hints. So it is equiangular. How many degrees, right? You guys know, right? This is an equiangular triangle. You know they got to add up to 180. You know they're all equal. So how many degrees is each of those angles? Once you realize that, this problem just kind of, it just falls apart in a really good way. And what else do they tell us? Oh, they also tell us that this is a right angle. In other words, those are perpendicular. Remember, numbers are better than letters. If you can say definitively, this is a certain amount of degrees, this angle is a certain amount of degrees, this problem becomes a lot easier very, very quickly. Okay, let's see what problem's next. Okay, 8. Show these triangles are congruent by identifying all congruent corresponding parts. So this is just kind of a review of what does it mean to be congruent. Okay, so I'll kind of start you out here just in case you're wondering what the heck is this asking. All right, let me go with one pair of sides. I know that AB is congruent to CD. I know that because they got the 2 marks, right? I know that angle, I'll just kind of use 3 letters here. I know that angle CBA is congruent to angle, okay, we got the 2 marks there, we got 2 marks there, BCD. Okay, there are 3 other side lengths that you need to say are congruent, 2 other angle pairs you're going to say are congruent, and then you got to put it all together in an accurate congruent statement, right? Triangle blank, blank, blank is congruent to triangle blank, blank, blank. Remember, these need to match up, these need to match up, and these need to match up. And if you make those match up, then you will have a correct congruent statement. Okay, number 9. Remember what I said. Geometry first, algebra second, right? Another thing that I said not too long ago, numbers are better than letters. Okay, so we know that A has to match up with D. All right. We know that B has to match up with E. And we know that F has to match up with C, right? So if you know that, you know something very special about this angle and how it relates to this angle. I feel like I'm giving you too much. But hey, I guess if you're watching the video, you appreciate that. All right, and we know EF, how that matches up. Oh man, I really am giving you too much. EF matches up with BC, right? All right, I've said way too much. Numbers are better than letters. Lead with the geometry. Make an equation. All right, if it could be a simple linear equation, that's better than a system of equations. Hey, sometimes you need a system of equations, and you may. Or maybe you could solve for one variable, plug it into another equation, and all of a sudden, voila, you've got a solution there. Anyway, I have definitely said too much about number 9. Okay, number 10. Okay, remember, lead with the geometry here. What do you know about these angles? Okay, well, they tell us that this angle has to equal that angle, right? Numbers are better than letters. I think we got an equation, ladies and gentlemen, right? Okay, now some angles you might have to figure out, right? You know what this angle is, right? If you know what that angle is, you could probably figure out what that angle is. And if you know what that angle is, well, you know how this works, right? This is 90 degrees. That's, all right, remember this. You got to geometry, right? Buy two, get one free when you're talking about angles, right? Because if you know two angles are congruent, which you know, because you know you got two 56-degree angles right there. You know you got two 90-degree angles right there. There is only one thing left, right? Right? Those green angles, right, are equal to each. I already said too much. Anyway, this is not an easy problem. Obviously, you got two variables. I imagine system equations will come into play. I don't know. You guys find out the hard way. Number 11. Okay, find the value of x and y. Okay, they give us some information though, right? They tell us these triangles are congruent. That right there gives us a ton of information. Specifically, PQS is congruent to RQS. What that means, PQ has to be the same as RQ. Boom, we got an equation, ladies and gentlemen, right? Also, it looks like, well, we know that QS, or PS, excuse me, right, has to be congruent to RS. You know what? We got another equation. You got a system of equations, ladies and gentlemen. You can take it from here. All right. Now, depending on when you are doing this packet, you may or may not have gotten to the lesson where we show you how to prove triangles are congruent. So if you haven't, what I'm going to do is I am going to present this as if you know, right? So if you don't already know the congruence rules, watch a YouTube video and or just wait to learn it in class. Truth is, you're going to learn it pretty soon in class. But anyway, what do all these things mean? These are basically side means if you have three pairs of corresponding sides, you could prove those two triangles are congruent. Two pairs of corresponding sides, an included angle or an angle in the middle, you could prove they're congruent. Any two angles in the side, you could prove that they're congruent. And so that kind of, both of those are kind of included in that. And then if you have a right triangle and the hypotenuse, corresponding hypotenuse and hypotenuse, hypoteni and a leg are congruent, then those triangles will be congruent as well. So keeping that in mind, right? Three pieces of information, well, I guess in this case two. Well, three because you know it's the right angle. Three pieces of information are needed, three specific pieces. And what are they giving us, right? So typically with this, they're giving us certain things. They're telling us MI and IL are congruent, right? And is there something about IK that you could say that, well, it's pretty obvious which segment IK is congruent to? And just in case it's not obvious, the two triangles that we're referring to, I'll make them red and blue, right? Okay. All right. So again, if we could prove that, well, anyway, I can't say it anymore without literally giving it away, right? Now this one here, they're asking us, is this triangle congruent to this triangle, right? And what do they give us, right? They tell us we got some perpendicular stuff going on here, right? They tell us QM and MN, right? Yeah, they tell us that this is perpendicular. They tell us that QM and ON, right? And then they tell us P is the midpoint. What does that mean about these two segments? All right, at this point, I think, again, I've said too much. I guess if you're watching the video, you probably appreciate me saying too much, but I don't think your teachers will. So I got to make you earn it. Okay, here, A is the midpoint of EF and GH. All right, so A is the midpoint of EF and GH. So that kind of tells us two things. That tells us something about how these two segments relate to each other. It tells us something about how these two segments relate to each other. But the thing is, you don't have enough yet. You do not have enough to prove that these triangles are congruent. I don't think you've got, so what? So you got these sides, you got those sides, right? All right, do you know anything else? Right, do you know anything else? All right, now think about the angles. Think about last unit. Think of what you know. All right, again, I've already said too much there. Number 15, given that E and C are right angles. Okay. Given that BE and BC are congruent, and given that BF is congruent to BD, BF and BD, all right, do we know enough here? Okay, so this is kind of tough to visualize. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw one triangle in green. I'm going to draw another triangle in red. If it helps you to draw those triangles separately, then you could draw those triangles separately. That may help you, right? So anyway, again, think back to your congruence rules, right? Any of those 5 rules satisfied by this situation? Maybe so, maybe no. So anyway, that's up to you to justify and to say if they're congruent. Number 16, okay. Determine whether these are congruent. Okay, so this is pretty tricky. Now, what I can say here is that if these triangles are in fact congruent, right, it means that all corresponding sides are congruent. In other words, they're the same length. It means all corresponding angles are congruent. In other words, they have the same measure. Now, it might be hard to determine what the angles are here, right? But I know that you could figure out the lengths of the sides. I know you can do it because you did it in a previous problem. Now, what might be easier here is to prove, if you can prove they're not congruent. In other words, you could prove there's one thing, like one pair of corresponding sides that are not congruent. Well, they're not congruent. Okay? If you prove that all 3 pairs of corresponding sides are congruent, well, because of the SSS rule, you've also proven that the triangles are congruent, right? So it's got to go in one of these 2 directions. They're saying determine, so they're not telling you they're congruent. They're saying you got to figure it out. Okay, number 17. Carl, a piece of cake of the shape. Oh my goodness, you got to draw the diagram here. Okay, an isosceles triangle with those measurements. He wanted to divide it into 2 equal parts. So we cut through the middle of the 26-degree angle to the midpoint of the opposite side. He says that because he's dividing it at the midpoint of a side, the 2 pieces of cake are congruent. Is that enough information? Can Carl say this? Has he proven they are congruent? So just the key here is drawing it. Do you want me to draw it? All right, fine, I'll draw it. I'm only drawing it because you've watched this far along in the video, and I'm assuming that you appreciate the extra tips I'm giving you, or you would no longer be watching this video. Now, what does Carl do? First of all, we need to recognize this is isosceles, right? And it is because the base angles are congruent, so either way you slice it. This is, slice it, right? So he cuts it right down the middle. He cuts it to the midpoint of the opposite side. Okay. Now, he's saying that these 2 triangles are congruent. Specifically, this triangle here, I'll draw in green, and this triangle here, I'll draw in purple. Maybe I'm drawing too much, but hey. He's saying they're congruent, right? Can he justify that statement, right? Now, I've already given you some hints here. You know, basically, you need 3 pieces of information to prove triangles are congruent. You already got 2. You just got to deliver the 3rd one, and I've already said too much. I'm moving on. Number 18. Find the measure of each side of a triangle. It's isosceles with these 2 sides equaling each other. And then MN is 2 less than 5 times X. Oh, my God. NP is 7 more than 2 times X. PM is 2 more than 3 times X. Okay. So the key here, you guys, is translating words into math. Okay. So you know what? I'll give you a diagram here, right? So it goes, here's N, here's M, here's P. We know these 2 are congruent. They give us a variable expression, right, for each of these, right? You have to translate the variable expression into words, right? Excuse me. You have to translate the words into variables, right? And you got to set up the equations. You got to solve it. That's why you guys signed up for honors. Okay, 19. All right, find the value of X and Y. Okay, so here's the thing here, right? What type of triangle you have? What have I kept saying? Lead with the geometry. Geometry first, algebra second, right? So do you know anything about the measures of these sides and how they would relate to each other? Right? I think I've already said too much. Another thing I want to say, numbers are better than letters. Right? So if you got an equation with two variables, wouldn't you rather an equation with one? I'll leave it at that. Number 20, describe the correct error made. Okay, this is more a logic one. I'm not going to give you any tips on this because I need you to think it through. I need you to write it out. Your teacher needs the same. 21, find the perimeter. Okay, again, lead with the geometry. Lead with the geometry. You know that these angles are congruent. What does that tell you about two of the sides, right? Can you set up an equation? Can you solve for x, right? I've already said too much. And remember what perimeter means. Perimeter does not mean one of the sides. It means all the sides added up. Okay, now finally here again, lead with the geometry, right? What does this congruent statement tell you? What does it tell you about how angle A relates to angle D, and how angle B relates to angle E, and how angle C relates to angle F? Okay, I've already said too much. You got to do the algebra. You got to figure that out on your own. And you guys, I think this is a wrap. That's all 22 questions. I hope this video was helpful. And if it wasn't, hey, I'll see you in extra help. Anyway, you guys, good luck on this honors packet, and good luck on the Chapter 4 honors test.